Battlestar Galactica Season 3, Episode 13 is over, but we have to go fracking down the hatch here on RHAP. We know scripted TV, we know BSG, taking a break from all your worries. That's the name of this episode of Battlestar Galactica. I'm Josh Wigler. I'm joined here by Mike Bloom. Mike Bloom, taking a break from all your worries. Doesn't that sound like an appetizing prospect right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think more so the state of the world is trying to put a punctuation mark in there and saying, like, taking a break from all your, worries, because there's plenty in the outside world and plenty here as well, Josh, as, listen, we've got a prisoner in our midst, so we got to get to the bottom of, like, what information can we squeeze out of his possibly lifeless corpse by the end of this that we can use to help the plot moving forward?
Yeah. So there's a lot going on here as it pertains to Gaius Baltar. You mentioned last week when we closed out, Gaius Baltar has been recovered from the Cylons. He is back with the fleet. We probably can't let that lie for too long. And indeed, we don't. We have basically an all Gaius all the time sort of episode. Other than that, it's the quadrangle, which miss me on the quadrangle, Mike Bloom. More and more, I'm feeling less and less high on the quadrangle. Not that I started in a really high place with it.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Yup, cosine +1, add everything onto there. I mean, Josh, I left this episode, and this was not exactly my viewing experience in it, but I left it kind of looking back on the previous 42 minutes and wondering, what did we gain from that
Yeah.
episode? I think the solitary thing to gain was not even Gaius Baltar, but I would more so say a really welcome performance from James Callis, who
Yes.
really has not had a lot of stuff to do. I know I've talked a lot about Trisha Helfer kind of being given the short end of the stick in season 3. The more you think about the characterization of Gaius Baltar, he's not that terribly far behind. Like, let's chart him here. He spends the first part of the season, the first 4 episodes on New Caprica as this, like, lame duck president who has some interesting scenes, but by and large is being quite literally held captive by the Cylons. He gets
Yes.
taken aboard the Cylon ship, and to me, it's less so about learning about him as much as it is kind of using him as an envoy for exposition of, okay, guys, let me explain to you all this stuff that's happening. And he is one of
Yes.
these people to move the plot forward. So I'm glad we finally have an opportunity to stop into what is probably the most complicated character in BSG. That said, I don't know how much more we learn about him. The information that he reveals is the same stuff that we know. I think it's more so setting up this interesting conceit of getting this character back into the fold. And to your point, I would have thought at least something would have been moved in some direction with the quadrangle. But I will admit, as much as
Did we move anywhere?
no, that's the thing. At the end of last episode, from my perspective at least, and maybe it was a bit of a jump to conclusions, but when I had seen everyone be reunited and Lee and Dee and, Sam and Kara reconcile in that moment, my assumption was that this was a larger sense of, okay, we're going back to our respective corners, to go back to the boxing analogy, and we're moving on from there. I didn't need an entire episode of like, oh, but maybe, no, never mind.
Yeah.
That the only thing is, there is one bold take that this is setting up for me that I'll set up at the end of this episode, but by and large, I'll use the word. This felt utterly useless to
Yeah,
me.
fair. Nothing burger, as you like to. Is this a nothing udon soup?
To be like nothing burger, but it's has more of a sour taste than nothing, because again, at least with something like the glass ballerina, which we coined previously, like it didn't actively make me feel like we've already done this. Why are we doing this again? Which I think is a different feeling than, okay, why are we here? This
Right.
felt like actively repeating the same beats, or in this case, teasing out something might happen. And I mean, I guess maybe they want to create a larger character psychological explanation as to why they did respectively settle back with their respective spouses. But it still felt like almost over-explaining the decision that was made. And it's a
Yeah.
decision that, as I mentioned before, I don't necessarily like either.
Yeah, no, totally fair. I don't love it either. I think that whole side of the storyline this week is really, really subpar. I think the stuff going on with Gaius is very compelling. I think that the relationship between him and Felix taking the turn that it takes, I think, is a pretty exciting development. And I think that we also, we'll talk about it, like all of the visions that Baltar has about his time with the Cylons and his questioning of whether or not he's a Cylon. And while he's under, he's our
Truth
truth
serum.
serum, while he's like having like his lost season 5 Saeed in the jungle moment, he is going to be asked the direct question, "Are you a Cylon?" And he, at least at his core, he says, and therefore, do you believe him when he says no? So I'm looking forward to talking that through. And I'm always looking forward to talking about Battlestar Galactica with you, even if it's an episode that you don't fracking like, Mike. It's
listen,
still this episode could be useless, but this episode of Down the Hatch certainly will not be.
Listen, if the past 5 years are any experiment, or like the past 10 years of me getting to create content, I have oftentimes said that I sometimes have as much fun, if not even more fun, talking about things that I do not like than things that I do. It is much easier, sometimes more enjoyable to pick apart things you don't like than trying to go through the thesaurus of love to try to make sure you're just not repeating yourself. And so, yeah, it's also interesting because I personally feel like this stretch of episodes in the middle are not ones that I have enjoyed immensely. Like with Unfinished Business, ironically enough, despite being such a polarizing episode, kind of being my sole exception. I feel like since we've hit the whole virus plot with Torn and the two-parter there into this weird hero episode that continues to be more and more of an outlier into the Eye of Jupiter two-parter, which I was a little on and off about through this. I'm a little bit like, where we land in this ship? So it's intriguing to touch down and talk about it this week.
Well, I think that like we're at a point where like we could stop down even right now and just talk about the fact that like, wouldn't it have been nice to stay on New Caprica for a while? Like bad for the peeps. Like it would have been very bad for the people there. And like we may lose more than just Saul's eye and wife if we really linger on New Caprica. But I feel like the types of stories we could have told on New Caprica versus I think what you're rightly, in my opinion, identifying as like middle series-itis, right? Like we're sort of
we had
like,
this with season 2 as well, I remember.
and we, you have this on just about even the ones we really love, including Lost. You have these on these like, these shows that have like a big dramatic through line that are serialized that have like 20 fracking episodes per season, and like you're going to get to certain episodes that feel like they're just there to fill out an episode count. Sometimes that could be like a great creative problem that needs some solving, and it can be very fun to deal with. Other times, maybe the show doesn't rise to that challenge, and like that could be for a number of reasons. It could be as simple as bad ideas winning. It could be as simple as fatigue, the fatigue of making a show winning out. Whatever the reason, I feel very similarly about the middle stretches of season 2 and 3. These are like in my memory of Battlestar Galactica, which I've said many times. Mike, you've never seen this before. I've seen it a few times, but I do not know it anywhere even remotely close to the way that I know some of my other shows, certainly Lost. So when I think back on this show in memory, based on what we have experienced thus far, let me tell you what, like anytime, even if I'm not close to a rewatch, these are things that I will recall. I'll recall the miniseries and basically everything. I'll recall a lot of season 1, most of season 1, I would say. Season 2 through like the Kobol stuff, and we lose Billy for sure, but like
the watermark of Battlestar Galactica, losing Billy.
But like the ramp up to New Caprica, like the Pegasus stuff, and then the ramp up to New Caprica, like between Pegasus and the ramp up to New Caprica, it gets a little murky for me even now talking that through. With season 3, we have the New Caprica stuff, and we're still kind of in that period that like sometimes I forget about. So like that's where we are right now. I promise you we will be going to very memorable territory before the end of the season.
Oh, I mean,
Um
imagine so. I mean,
uh,
listen, I would not be surprised. The show again, some usually moves forward at like a precipitously quick pace. So I was thinking at the end of this episode, the trial of Gaius Baltar would be an incredible season
yes.
end setting. But knowing the show, it's gonna be the setting of like episode 16.
Yes. So we'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about everything that's going down here. Ooh, a little hiccup on the pod. Everything that's going down this week on Battlestar Galactica. Mike, of course, if people want to send in feedback, down the hatch, RHAP at gmail.com. That's the way. And make sure you are
Jamail.
subscribed. Yes. Great character on Summer Heights High. So you can send in your feedback down the hatch, RHAP at gmail.com. Make sure you subscribe. You'll never miss an episode of DTH.
Wait, how you and I have been friends for a decade. How did I not know that you've watched Summer Heights High before?
Rodney's coming over to watch a
DVD.
DVD.
Yeah.
Who's cooking dinner? Not me.
Me.
Yeah, I like a highly problematic show that I cannot. I will not disavow. I can't. I just can't. Just a ridiculous.
Welcome to Mr. Big G's room. G's room.
Yeah. Come inside. Please be quiet, Cylon number 9. Anyway, that's for another time.
Oh, I can't wait for someone to do a musical about Cat ODing on Stims.
I'm a Cylon. I'm a what? I'm a what? Being a Cylon? Okay, we can't do that. Season 3, episode 13, taking a break from all your worries, directed by EJO himself. So you may want to apologize to the Admiral for besmirching his episode.
I do. I would love to hear the direction of him just going to, these actors and be like, just scream as loudly as you can. Like, we'll get into it. I know that we see Gaius Baltar for the first time in a long time, but this is like a whole new version of Laura Roslin unlocked, which is pretty wild.
Lots going on with Laura, who is really going to delight in taking on Baltar in this episode. So why don't we take on Baltar first? We'll take on Baltar, then we'll do the quadrangle. So the episode begins with Head 6 singing something akin to a lullaby to Baltar, while Baltar is tearing fabric from his quarters. We missed this last time out. Ought to have given the content warning that this is going to be an episode that features a suicide attempt right at the jump, as well as torture for the remainder of Baltar's storyline in this episode. He is thinking about ending his life with the thought, which makes this a little different, that he'll wake up on a resurrection ship.
Yeah.
And initially he sees that, right? Like he does it, he hangs, he's in a resurrection pod.
And then he's hanging with all the 6s.
He's in a goo pod. There's all the 6s. This is so cool. But then the 6s are like, you're not one of us. You're a human being.
Yeah. I mean, so maybe there was like 0.1 second where I was like, okay, this is for real. Because again, maybe it's just a bit of manifestation on my part. I will continue to beat this drum that I think Gaius Baltar is not a Cylon, and I will outright say if he is, it feels like a disservice to the character and the show. I find it wholly more intriguing with this idea of like one of the biggest Cylon sympathizers, and sort of like, especially from a political aspect, like with such an us versus them mentality, getting in the head of the guy who is sort of getting in bed with the opposition and how he tries to excuse his own sins in a manner of speaking. That to me means a lot more character-wise than like, no, he was a Cylon the entire time, so he's just helping his own kind. I think what gave it away for me, Josh, that it was a dream was the vociferous massaging of his face. Even before they start like clawing at him with the pumice stones or whatever, it's like, I think even the Cylons have, their own sanitary conditions. They would not immediately massage I would say profusely goo-covered Gaius Baltar. Feels like everybody else.
The goo, though. They love the goo. They use the goo to pilot. Like, the goo is sort of like the river of slime from Ghostbusters 2, right? Like, which powered the Statue of Liberty. That's the stuff that powers the base stars. You gotta imagine the Cylons like the goo.
I mean, quite literally in his dreams. As it turns out, nope, you were human the entire time. Though, of course, I think the big giveaway is when he's saying, oh, no one was betrayed. I was never one of them. I am one of you. And one of the 6s says, is that what you think, Gaius? And yeah, as will be mentioned later on, this is Gaius Baltar in a nutshell. That he has,
Help!
unfortunately,
I'm in a nutshell.
how do I get out of this nutshell? Actually, James Callis would have been a very interesting Austin Powers. The more that I think about it, and actually, Austin did come out of a goo pod on his own as
Yes, he
well.
did. Yes, he
But
did.
I do think that this is a character who, whether he was sitting sidecar or haplessly on the motorcycle himself, did help commit genocide on a planet and destroyed millions upon millions of human souls. And he has to live with that, and essentially giving himself every reason under the sun to still live with that and not outright die from the guilt that he has committed. And so here he's very clearly, and has been for the past few episodes, putting his eggs all in the basket of, well, I'm a Cylon. It's just my programming. Clearly, that's why I did it. It's not due to any moral fallacies on my part. And so, yeah, the fact that he was kind of lampshading that was also a very key indicator to me of, yeah, this ain't real.
This ain't real. What is real is Felix Gaeta was coming to check in on Baltar. Check in on Gaius
Do you think
Baltar.
he would have? Do you think he would have done the pen that time around, or did he have other means and ways?
Yeah, I wonder. Was it just going to be like a full-on throttle?
I mean, it could have been
Throttle?
the full on, John Locke, Ben Linus chokeout.
Yes, always could be. So we don't know. We never see. Gaeta doesn't get the chance, and Gaeta doesn't just let this happen either. So I think like Gaeta really like needed the blood. He needed the taste of blood. Otherwise, it wasn't going to be satisfying enough. Baltar is going to be saved. He's not dead. Doc Coddle is weighing in on the fact that lots of Doc Coddle. I think a good Doc Coddle episode. Doc Coddle is just like sort of like voice of reason throughout this whole thing. Like, he's not giving you anything. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, and because as we see a little bit in the opening, and maybe one of the reasons why they're singing this lullaby like it's a demented trailer to a horror film, is because they're trying to torture him by keeping him awake.
Yeah.
And then he is sort of responding in kind by going on a hunger strike, basically saying like, "You'll get that information out of me when I'm dead." So there's kind of like this weird loggerheads going on, and luckily, we are spared the graphic detail of the feeding tube that Doc Coddle is going to be forced to shove down Gaius Baltar's throat to give him some sort of nutrients to keep him alive.
Mercifully, we don't have to see that. We hear about
Exactly.
it, but we very luckily don't have to see that. So they're gonna get him to eat. Ty says, "Let's put a security camera in the cell." Gaeta, hey, why did you go and visit Baltar? Yeah, I just want to talk. I thought maybe he
Just want
talked
to
to
check
me.
in.
So maybe I thought that would work. Rosalind is going to be the one who goes and visits Gaius in prison. She is going to give him a smoke.
This is such a badass like sequence of a couple of scenes for Mary McDonnell, and it's almost like a little bit out of the Adama playbook. Maybe it was originally Adama scenes, but EJL was like, "I have to direct behind the scenes. We'll give
I
it to
can't do
Laura
it.
Rosalind." Though there is a fun little piece of symmetry here when Rosalind gives her glasses to Baltar, and we even get this through flashback of the time when he visited her when she was in the Cylon prison, and he gave her his glasses. It's a really interesting relationship, obviously, with the two of them. Incredibly complicated. He saved her life. She responded in kind by kind of, talking shit behind his back, or at
Yep.
least almost posthumously. He then responded in kind by running for president to spite her, ended up winning. She ended up being part of this big insurgency movement. She was in prison. She was on the list to be publicly executed that Gaius Baltar signed off on. So this is one of the more nuanced dynamics of characters in this show. And I'm glad that we got an opportunity to take a brief stop in on it, even if this sequence is not necessarily that nuanced. It's basically like, you have information, I want it out of you. Gaius Baltar says, "Over my dead body." And she's like, "Well, we'll get close to
Bet.
it."
Yeah, she's interested in that. She pulls out the new the Caprica 6 stuff.
Yep.
Were you with the blonde woman before the attacks? Careful, Gaius. Is what Head 6 weighs in. Like, if you tell the truth, she may throw you out of the airlock right now. But it's just like, this is a thing that's been bubbling for a little while. And so to get that direct confrontation here is really cool.
Yeah, even though, again, Baltar's going to continue to Baltar and just deny, deny, deny. And again, I think
All
Adama,
lies.
Adama's really going to fixate on, again, why he does what he does. And it's not just because he's this, like, delightful, slippery weasel that we have known him to be since the very beginning. It's that him admitting what he did is also him admitting guilt and him admitting sin and him basically like consigning him to his fate and not
Yeah.
essentially confirming his worst fears of like, look at what you did. You are a terrible person. So him denying is not also outright to keep him safe and out of an airlock, but also I think in a way him being able to excuse himself of like, listen, if it happened, it was purely coincidental. You know, I was merely a player. I'm a pawn in this game, same as you. And Laura Roslin is not going to take kindly to that because she goes full bellow at this moment.
It's fascinating to me because I can feel for both of these characters. On like the one hand, like we've seen Baltar's journey fairly step by step to the point where we know that like he didn't do this on purpose, but he was a philanderer and he gave this person access to stuff that she shouldn't have had access to. This thing that could have gone wrong any number of ways goes wrong in like one of the absolute worst possible ways in the form of like.
And he's also spent the better part of almost 3 seasons trying to dig his way out by
Right.
essentially digging down, right? Of like, all right, I guess I'll just keep lying about this stuff. And well, we can need this nuclear warhead that, oops, killed more people. Like it's this fun little Sisyphean journey of like, he keeps almost pushing the boulder down the hill to dig himself deeper and deeper, thinking it's going to somehow get him out of this situation.
Well, he just doesn't know. And, like, I think that there is a true core belief that he holds on to that, like, this wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I was the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had a literal gun to my head for some of the worst of it. So, like, I think that, like, he really does believe that, it seems like, by the end of this episode, and even like within this episode, like on a fundamental level, he believes that he has been wronged, that he is being like overly punished. And I think like maybe there's some truth to that. At the same point, I totally understand Rosalind here. She wasn't the president, but he was. He settles on New Caprica. All of this stuff happens. She probably feels some kind of way about herself, you would imagine, and not being able to do enough to save everybody. And Gaius Baltar is a very convenient and often worthy punching bag. So you can kind of see it from both sides of the line. And I think part of the reason why I can see it from Baltar's is largely not due to the writing, but due to James Callis. And I think that he just does such a good job of convincing me that he believes in what he's saying as Gaius Baltar. And he is in such obvious distress that like it can't help but pull on my empathy, like the empathetic part of my heartstrings, at least for a little while. Whether or not it works the whole way through is another question. But she's gonna like walk him through the memorial wall. He's like, "That's my lab assistant. That's Dave. I got Dave and his wife together.
That's my Davey."
You think that I would kill him? And so like that's like his big point that he tries to make. Later, Rosalind, Adama, and Ty, they regroup and they're like, okay, so either like he called that it was a bluff, or he really doesn't care that much if he dies, or he doesn't know anything. And so it's Adama who comes up with the idea of like, so listen, I saw the time travel season of Lost, and in that episode they give Saeed LSD and he tells the truth. So why don't we just do that? So they're gonna like LSD him basically.
Yeah, is that the assumption? Because listen, this is like outright sci-fi. You never know if it's like, oh, some fangled futuristic thing to
I don't know.
It's just like Gaius Baltar like has a bad trip and is basically forced to reveal information.
They give him some sort of hallucinogenic that causes him to go off on some sort of like
go off king,
go off short king, like lightly lucid vision quest that he seems to go on here. That it can be guided. It's almost like a hypnosis. It feels like.
I feel bad for Baltar then. Like he got put in a bottle episode. Usually, what we love about the Mind Palace, right, is that there's these sprawling environments, but he's also used to that usually. So I think, unfortunately, his Mind Palace budget ran out. So we're just gonna throw you in the middle of the ocean. I
think that's fair. So he's gonna be Doc Cottle. He administers the drug. He doesn't really want to do it, but he does it. We see that Baltar, yes, is like drowning in a sea of endless water. Look for the light, he's hearing. He sees a flashlight, and we see that it's Adama which is so
It's
funny.
Tom Friendly with a fake beard asking for the boy.
It's Edward James Olmos directing himself, directing Gaius Baltar is what we are seeing right now. So there's a little Inception going on. We are going to see Rosalind asking some questions like, did you collude to subvert the defense systems? He said, I never meant for this to happen. I didn't collude. And he says, but she said that I knew deep down. And this is when we want to like drill down into this idea of like, okay, so you're admitting, he admitted that there is a relationship with a 6.
You want to marry a Cylon.
But he sees in his mind's eye, in his vision, he sees a 6. And she had previously said, I can't help you. So that to me feels like the head 6 that we know and hope, maybe love, maybe like loathe, who knows where this is going. But the head 6 that we are familiar with tells Baltar before this happens, I can't help you now. Baltar, right, within his vision is going to see a 6 and then 6s and then more people. I feel like these are different characters that he is seeing. Did you feel it any kind of different way?
Yes, I think the characters that are drowning him, I don't know if it's a one-for-one recreation, but they are dressed a lot like the photos that Rosalind will show in her, umpteenth effort to get Gaius Baltar to talk. She actually shows like file photos of dead bodies being like, hey, here are some of the insurgent families who got killed due to your actions or lack thereof as president. So I think it's an example of like him being kind of metaphorically dragged to hell by all the souls that he damned. And so you could see it a couple ways. It could have been the people on Caprica proper who either got killed in those initial explosions or were left behind, or it could have been the people on New Caprica. But that's what I really saw it as, considering that's what they're primarily addressing him with.
Yeah. So he's surrounded by these people in his vision. He starts talking about the temple and the Eye of Jupiter. And they're like, what did you see? He's like, I didn't see shit. We were supposed to go and look at the faces of the final 5, but Xena saw them and I didn't. And he's like, and I really wanted to be one.
She's not even a bloody main cast member on this show.
He's like, I wanted to be one of them. And Rosalind asks the question directly that's been on the minds of everybody, basically looking at every character, but certainly at Baltar at this point. Are you a Cylon? And if this is getting down to like some fundamental core essence of who Gaius Baltar is, then this core essence of Gaius Baltar either doesn't, like even this core essence doesn't know he's a Cylon, or you take at face value what he says in response when he says, no, he's not a Cylon. He wanted to be. Being a Cylon would have meant there was no treachery. Being a Cylon would have meant there was no betrayal. But he feels deeply that he betrayed, or not that he betrayed, that he's not one of them, that he is one of the people. Talk me through this, Mike. We could take this any number of ways, but how are you reading it?
Well, I mean, Head 6 sort of taunts him earlier by saying, without free will, what even are you? Can God even pity such a creature? But what Baltar is kind of pitching here is sometimes it's nice that I have free will, which is odd to say, but like when you are somebody who interminably looks upon every single decision that you make, it can be a really nice out to say, these were my decisions to make. The die was cast. It'll be something that's going to be really interesting looking at Starbuck moving forward, especially now that we are probably done with the Lee stuff, at least temporarily. Now we'll focus more so on like, okay, does Starbuck have a special destiny? And this idea, as we focused on with Lost and a lot of pieces of culture of, okay, if you are the chosen one, if you are fated to do something, do you actually have the ability to do something? Or was this always going to happen? If so, then are you even a person at the end of the day? Or like the Cylons, are you following a piece of programming? And so, I'm glad he sort of ends up saying the quiet part out loud. I am glad that humanity now has these pieces of information in their pocket where, like, now they know about the Final 5. Rosalind's going to try to do some connection to the temple as well. So maybe we'll get a little bit of, like, the two sides of the same coin. The gods and the Cylon god might be one in the same. I also did like the imagery, besides it being incredibly frightening for me as someone who's afraid of open water, but the idea of having Gaius Baltar stranded out in an environment where it's as Adama's going to kind of taunt him, right, using the god mic. All right, well, just tread water and we're going to have you drown. This is where he feels at this point in time, right? I feel like he's sort of manifesting this environment as a state of where he feels,
Yeah.
where he stopped by in the Big G at the beginning of the two-part episode and said it feels like home, and then Head 6 was like, nope, this isn't your home. It's clear that the Cylons wasn't his home because he's not a Cylon, or at least he doesn't feel he is. Now he's back home and is not treated very well, understandably so. And so I think he really does feel like he is out on an island on his own, looking for something to cling on to. And I do not find it coincidental that the one person that appears in front of him is a form of 6. Is this person, whether or not a manifestation or not, as he is going to vocalize, he gets back to one of the biggest existential questions he's had since the beginning. Is she an angel or a demon? Is she imaginary or is she real? Is she my own voice or the voice? Oh yeah, are you an angel? So I think that he's been on his own pod race through, through the Beggar's Canyon at this point. He's begging for some answers, and I think that when Head 6 returns to him later on, it is a little bit of like a default back to the status quo where he is kind of like gone on. It's almost weird to say the hero's journey, right? But it's a part of the hero's journey. Like you've come back full circle, almost returning back to whence you came, but having learned something about yourself. I think Gaius Baltar has certainly been down that road, that he has now he's back on the Big G. Yes, he is now awaiting trial, but like he's still back on where he has been for the better part of the series. He still has Head 6 serving as his moral compass, but now he has come back with the knowledge that he is not a Cylon, but he is the chosen one. And so I think that's also kind of the life wrap that he is clinging to as well, of like, I may not be a Cylon,
but there's got to be something else. I have to be involved.
Yeah,
like, there's got to be a reason for all of this.
I mean, what he monologues almost humorously in the cold open, right? When he's taken in and what he thinks is the fake goo pod is him being like, yes, well, I always knew I was special. This makes a lot of sense. Like, this is, to your point, a way for him to excuse so much and so much more of what he's going to do in the series, that feels like the path he is going to continue down. And it feels like this entire scene, and also the fact that one of his closest human confidants is going to try to murder him with a pen to the neck, is really going to cement for him, like, this is your path forward.
Yeah. So let's check back in with Felix Gaeta, who is checking back in on Gaius Baltar. This is going to be the follow-up plan, Mike. Well, torture didn't work. Let's try his BFF.
So I'm very intrigued about this surveillance aspect, Josh. First, like, they're interrogating him in the cell, right?
Yes.
Why did they not put surveillance equipment in there?
They did put surveillance equipment,
but not before this episode. You know,
why don't they just have it in there all the time?
I don't know. Maybe it's just the police state that we existed, but it kind of feels like, isn't that like a normal thing? Is to put cameras in a holding cell?
It was, the Big G, an analog ship. They've got like VHS. Like, it's a whole thing. They just hadn't set it up quite yet.
The other thing was, I wasn't sure, though, to that point about the audio-visual element. Was there an audio element? I feel like they didn't get any sound from the camera feed.
Or they just allowed us to hear the sound. I mean, enough goes wrong here that they're able
they have to read a lot of body language.
They read a lot of body language. Gaeta and Baltar are talking, and Baltar realizes that, like, Gaeta is not here on the level. Like, at first, they're talking maths. They're talking about equations and calculations for the course to Earth.
Gaeta does a great thing, which is like, Baltar, obviously is in his feelings. And actually, while we're separating these storylines, maybe my favorite part of the episode, besides the whole tripping sequence, was like the counteracting between Baltar here and Lee's admission of love to D, which is like, they forced me to admit my failings, and now that I have, I feel liberated. And Gaeta uses this as to say, like, come on. I know we both like measuring shit. Like, can you? And I also know you love explaining things to me. You love mansplaining. Can you talk to me about how to measure, how to get to Earth at this point? And he nearly gets them. Yeah. But because Gaeta is able to like sneak a glance at the camera, Jim Halpert style, it dooms this path of the operation.
Yo, dog, I heard you like measurements. Baltar turns this on Gaeta and, ends up with this comment of like, there's one traitor in this room, and it ain't me.
I'm a faithful.
I'm
I'm a
a
bloody
faithful.
faithful.
I'm a bloody faithful. And he tells Gata, like, you were going trading information to the resistance. Who do you think let you do that? The fact that he knows this does suggest to me that there's some accuracy to what he's saying, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, it's also
how
that
else
like
would he have known this? No one else would have tipped him off to it. He didn't see this. He was held at gunpoint at one point by Gata. But as far as like visual evidence on screen, I don't think that we've seen anybody talk to him about any of this stuff. So the only way that it would make sense is if Baltar is telling the truth here of like, yeah, I knew you were going and like telling people shit. Like, I let that happen because I wanted that to happen. So like there are pieces of this where like I feel for Baltar to a degree where he's like, I had a literal gun to my head and I did what I could. Was it enough? No. Was there anything that he could have done that would have been enough? Probably also no. So
yeah.
like really like with a gun to his head on this one.
Yeah,
And then soon a pen to his neck because he gets stabbed in it by Gata, who doesn't like being told that he was a traitor. So he stabs Baltar and is almost curtains for the good doctor.
Well, and I think as well, you can map a lot of how Baltar's feeling onto Gata as well. That like what causes Gata to go aggro is Baltar, I don't know, kind of implying like what you did was worse than what I did
Yes.
because you're, trying to play both sides. At least I was forced to do it with my life on the
He
line.
loses me there that like what you did
Yeah.
was worse. Was like, okay, all right.
You're just doing it willy-nilly. Like, okay, we're not if you're trying to stand on the moral high ground, like it's on a very wobbly platform at this point where you stack a bunch of chairs on top of each other. Like
Yeah.
it's only a small shake away from falling at that point. But it causes Gata to go over the edge. And we have to look back upon, okay, so Rosalind's able to clock that when Gata initially visited Baltar, when he tried to hang himself, that he was actually going to kill him. And like, is this stemming back from the guilt that Gata feels? I mean, we
Right.
saw what happened when we came back from New Caprica, that Ty was looking at him sideways, and not just because he lost his eye, right? That like, whether he wanted to or not, whether it was due to his own actions, he is linked to this administration that did cause so much misery during their time on New Caprica. And maybe he felt the only way to stave off those sins was to like repent by saying, okay, if I kill this guy, it won't bring everyone back, but it'll help a lot more atrocities from happening at this point. And it'll make me feel better of like, well, at least I took the power into my own hands, which I think is a reason why he probably served as this sort of double agent as well of like, okay, I still have to do what I have to do, but I can also help these other people too. It's a very big decision that I think unfortunately kind of gets like yada yada over just because of Gata as a character and due to the momentum of the episode. But it is really interesting to look at these two guys who are linked to this administration and see how they have kind of the same conclusion, but use separate avenues to pursue this point of I need to make myself feel better about getting involved in a lot of bad shit.
Yeah, I think it's really it's a compelling notion that just a few episodes ago, Felix Gata was nearly thrown out the frackin' airlock for
Yeah.
being a traitor and working in the Baltar administration. And if not for Chief recognizing that he was the dude with the dog bowl, he would have been blown out the airlock. Here, Gata, who was like pleading for his life back then and pleading for his innocence, is now across from a man who's doing a version of the same thing. And instead of lending him a hand the way that Chief lent a hand to Gata, Gata responds with a pen to the neck, trying to kill this guy. I think that Felix Gata is a great character, and I think like he has been a really good side character, just like a great sort of like bridge crew plus, right?
Yep,
Like
yep.
for much of the run. But when they have opportunities to drill into who Felix is and why he's the way he is and the choices that he makes, I tend to think that the show makes good choices around the character, or at least compelling ones. And more to come is
Good.
all I'll say. But yeah, here hilariously, they de-escalate the situation. Rosalind's like, dude, I get it. And like she even tells the sergeant, like, go easy on him. So like, is he just gonna get away with this? Like, he can't keep getting away with it. But like, they may just be like, honestly, he gets a freebie. Like, that was a deserved pen to the throat. I don't know.
I think that's honestly what it is. I think it's also a little bit of like, you get what you pay for. Like, we understand what's going on with you, Gata, and so I think he's gonna continue to keep getting slaps on the wrist for this. I think he is enough of, to your point, sort of like a planet in the outer solar system of BSG. He's past the asteroid belt where, like, I think he'll still be a part of the show. I don't know if we're getting a cat-esque random episode where it's like, and here's where Felix Gata pays for all his crimes. It seems
Right.
like they're just going to kind of like continuously bring him in and out with these, to your point, like, whenever we do get him, it's very interesting character piece that makes him one of the more fun characters to talk through here because there's such scant information that we get. But I think also for sort of like the canon of the show, which, yes, does have a lot of serialization, but also by and large has episodes written by different people and does kind of default sometimes to an episode of the week motif, that it's like, yeah, we'll just kind of send Gata back to the CIC from whence he came, and maybe he'll get random scenes here and there.
The Gaius part of the storyline ends with him thinking that he's a chosen one. He's going to keep that a secret. He's not going to tell people that. He's going to keep that to himself. Rosalind is not going to get the guilty admission that she wants from Baltar, so we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. We're going to need to do a trial.
So let me bring in the deleted scene here, Josh. And for many reasons, I wish the deleted scene was in this episode because there is a very, very key context that is missing from this episode ending that is going to also lead into ultimately one of the MVP points I give out.
Ooh, interesting. Do you want to describe it?
Yeah, let's do it here because, as you had mentioned last week, I was like, oh, this is great. We'll have Baltar, we'll have Head 6, and also Caprica 6 is there because remember, she helped Athena. She brought baby Hera over. She defied her own kind, and she was arrested for it. And so I thought, okay, they're going to be occupying a space together. They are not. And actually, Caprica 6 conspicuously missing from this episode. Not in the deleted scenes, as we are treated to a near 4-minute scene between Rosalind and Caprica 6.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is really, really good. So from what I sort of picked up, it seems that, off screen, and this is like now off screen, because basically, this is often a deleted scene. But I think Caprica 6 had given away some information that, Rosalind is kind of coming into the Baltar conversations with in exchange for not only her own life, but also helping Gaius as well. Caprica 6, though, is not going to give away any more information unless she gets a promise that she won't essentially be airlocked. And Rosalind's like, yep, I promise that. And Caprica 6 is like, I still don't believe you, so I'm still not going to give you anything.
I heard what happened with Leoben. Your promise is no good here.
Exactly. And that's basically what she says. She says, like, oh, you said that to Leoben. And listen, a Cylon always remembers. And so Rosalind's going to say, look, I know you got the hots for Baltar. I don't understand it in many ways, considering the fact that he has betrayed you many times. But how about this? At least if you give me more information, you can help him. Because we're going to do some real nasty shit to him right now. And Caprica 6 counters by saying, what about your justice system? I saw that withered away along with your consciousness. If you try Baltar for his sins, I will give you everything you need to know. In fact, Madam President, I will be your chief witness at the trial. And so my assumption is...
Miro is going to have something to say about that. He's the only chief witness that we're allowed to have.
Exactly. There are more now, too many chiefs in the tribe, as it were. But my assumption now is that this is more so the conversation that ends up influencing Laura Rosalind moving forward with the trial. Less so, well, we've tried everything. I guess we got to leave it up to the judicial system.
Yeah. So we'll see if that wasn't just, a deleted scene or something that we will expand upon in the future. Let's go and talk about the other side of the episode. Mike, I know that we had been hoping that, this quadrangle stuff would be over, but the era of the quadrangle is still reigning. Still dreaming if you think that we're done with that stuff, Mike. We are still deeply in Lee and Kara and Sam and Dee territory. And we begin at Joe's.
Yes.
Joe's
So,
bar.
who is Joe? Is the question. Is Joe the bartender?
Joe the bartender, I think. Unless, like, is it a tribute to a Joe? Is there like an old Joe that they're
Grandpa Joe?
Grandpa Joe? Joe's is the name of the bar. I wonder if there's any sort of like, is it an Easter egg for the original show? I have no idea. It's just called Joe's. And Lee and Chief are tying one on. They're having a great time. They get drunk. They're both like, man, wives, am I right? And Lee goes home, and Dee is having a quiet,
in
like,
romances, am I right?
Dee is having a quick glass of wine. Lee comes home sloshed, and she says, hey, are we on for dinner tomorrow? And he's just like, he's just like passed out.
Okay, so let's get into this here. First off, awesome that we have a bar as a way to decompress. But, like, it's on the flight deck? Like, I'm sure Chief feels fine about it. He had his own little distillery, bathtub, gin, joint going on previously. But, like, this feels like it's taking up a fair amount of real estate when they are in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
Isn't this like the exact opposite of what Adama told them back in the boxing ring a few episodes ago?
Yeah, maybe. But, I don't know what to say in response to that other than as a bar. It's cool.
I mean, it's fun, and I imagine it'll be like a good setting, especially now that Cloud9 is officially wiped off the map. But
do we think that's just a Cloud9 set redecorated?
No, it looks much dingier than Cloud9. Yeah. Cloud9 was a classy joint. Like, there's flat-on Vipers in the background of Joe's here. And also, who's this bartender? Is this like a civilian? Or is he someone who's a commissioned member of the military?
I don't know. He's aboard the Big G with the staff bar, so who knows what his deal is. So Lee and Dee, Lee goes home. He's been drinking, and Dee has not been pushing it with him, but shall push with him momentarily. First, we check in with Sam and Starbuck. They're doing it, or are on the other side of having done so. And Sam is here not just to like, be like, I love you, but to do like two check-ins. Check-in number one is like, what's up with your destiny? Because I keep thinking about that, what Leo Ben said once upon a time and everything that's going on right now. And then Sam also says like, and how are you feeling about Lee? Because if you love him, she says, maybe. If you love him, you should go to him. I think Sam Anders is being a true bro right now.
Yeah, so, well, first off, the whole destiny thing, I don't know.
I'm a Sam man, I must admit.
I nothing Sam, so that's fine.
I'm a Sam man.
I'm more than happy to be positive on him, especially here. Where to your point, he's like to excuse a lot of stuff.
If we're like tier ranking the four members of the quadrangle, I think Sam comes off the best. Like consistently, Sam's like if you just want to leave, you should do that. I love you, but like I don't want to be in a thing where we're not like feeling the same way about each other.
Well, I think it's also because of the four, he comes across the most like a victim as well. This is not a D situation where he's like, I know what's happening.
He had no idea. He was completely devoid of any context for any of this. It's like, what did I get myself into?
I mean, listen, let's face it. Like this guy's been cooked for the better part of an entire season, and so, but so I do think it's interesting that he brings up the whole destiny thing because like. It was Chief that went to Starbuck, right? So like, is this completely out of nowhere?
It was Hilo.
Oh, it's Hilo, right? So he's like, I was thinking about this.
How quickly you forgot Hilo again?
Oh, he wasn't in this episode, but I was. He's like, just thinking the other day about the beginning of the season, how you were imprisoned by Leo Ben. Just like wanted to bring this up, like totally wild. Also, I laughed out loud at the revelation they were having this entire emotionally complicated pseudo reconciliation in the bunks. That they were just within earshot of these people.
Secret stuff, Mike. It's a tight ship. I don't know what.
Yeah, but at least in the past, nobody else was there when they were like canoodling in the bunks. Here, there's just people within earshot. When Tyrell was like, "I'm surprised you didn't overhear me fighting," like these people are right there, listening to their squabbles.
Yeah. So either they have hearing problems or they're just bored and they wanted a little drama. The next day, Lee goes to the bar again. He comes back from the bar. He runs into Dee. And Dee says, "Are you off to go see?" Oh, he's about to go to the bar. Sorry, he's about to go to the bar. She says, "You go to see Starbucks?" He's like, "No, I'm just here to nurse my
Yeah.
drinking problem." And
Basically,
he
it's that.
tells
So
Dee, he says, like, the major issue here isn't my history with Starbucks. The major issue here is your own insecurities. And first of all, frack off. And
yep.
secondly, then Dee says, "You know what? Maybe." And like I saw this coming, and I thought that I was lucky that you loved me, even though I knew you loved Starbuck. Go do whatever you want. Our relationship is over. So it's a very brief breakup between these two.
So yeah. So just to like talk about it from a timing perspective, it just seems like Lee is spending all his time at the bar drinking with Tyrell. Like him and Dee barely see each other, and they're building up to like, okay, we're gonna do something special. We're going out to dinner together, right? And then even then, like Lee still is taking the time, but like at basically every waking moment when he's not working, it seems to be that he is at the bar. And
Yeah.
so then she's really just gonna like really say the quiet part out loud here. Like, even though he's not going to see Starbuck, she admits, I knew this was coming. I saw it from a mile away, and I still wanted to marry you. And you know why? Because I loved you. But then she basically says, if you love something, you have to let it go. This is not a marriage. This is a lie. You want to be with Kara? Go ahead. And
Yeah.
then on the other side of things, which is going to make the situation you think simpler on the surface, but actually more complicated, Starbuck is finally coming around to like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because,
maybe the religious sanctity of a marriage doesn't mean a lot.
well, Sam was the one who's like, "Listen, if you love Lee, I don't want to be in this. So, like, go do it." And
I
so
mean, to be
she
fair, she does respond to that question with a very long pause, unblinking, and then says, maybe.
she goes to Lee and says, "Well, what do you think?" And he's the one who says, like, "How do I know you're not just going to change your mind again?" And like, we're talking about our marriages here, our marriages,
Marriage. That's and
marriage.
that's and that's the issue that I think, we have to wonder what causes Lee in particular, who seems to be like kind of the signal giver here, to go back to his marriage with Dee. And I wonder if for him, if
I
it is
need to get my honor back.
exactly. Well, I wonder if it is just sort of the like the tumultuousness of his romance with Starbuck in this moment, that while Patchen, again, while I do think them yelling to the stars that they love each other did feel sincere, he is still scathing from the fact that he would like put everything on the line last time at the beginning of that two-part episode and was like, all right, we're gonna break up each other, we're gonna break up our marriages and get together, right? And she's like, yeah, about that. I mean, hell, he doesn't know this, but when Sam asked her if she loved Lee, she said maybe. Like, it's very
Maybe.
clear that Kara is in a very complicated headspace, and there is a non-zero chance that, like, if they did get together, she would get cold feet, or she would get very self-destructive and be like, I have to break this relationship as well because I don't deserve you. So, like, it would have been really risking your life for some, or your romantic life, I should say, for something that might not come to fruition. And I think that's ultimately like where things settle at the end of the day, even though Lee and Dee and Sam and Carol will declare their loves for each other. I hate to say this, but the end of this episode story comes across to me like settling. It is like, let me go with the safer choice right now. Something that I know
Yeah.
is guaranteed to love me and stay stable as long as I contribute to it. As long and against, I'm just going to throw caution into the wind, take one of the biggest risks here, and try to go for something that I feel more passionate about, but comes with the downside of just due to who we are as people, as attracted as we are, driving us apart
Yeah.
and ruining our lives forever. That's where I sort of map things out, but it's done in a very unsavory way for Lee Adama, especially, who after this conversation, like,
He goes
yes,
on a bender. He asks Chief, like, "You ever think about Boomer?" He goes, "No," which feels like, yeah.
yeah,
And so,
like it
like,
definitely the lady Doubt protests too much a bit with Tyrell, especially considering that the only thing we see of him in this episode is like, God, I argue with my wife sometimes.
yeah, I love a good fight with my wife. So Chief says, "No, I don't think about Boomer." Lee gets super drunk. He loses his wedding ring. He's crying. He's
And then
freaked out.
throwing around cases in the hallway, being, I lost my wedding ring.
Yeah, he's really sad about it. And then he goes out on the date with Dee and says, did I love Kara? Maybe, but I'm with you. I'm with you. And for Dee, that's good enough for now. And Sam is like, hey, that's Lee over there. Like, are you cool to be here right now? And she's like, yeah, totally cool. So Sam, like, trying to check in on Starbuck, who's like, at least she isn't leaving yet. And so he's like, okay, well, I guess that's fine for now. And with Lee and Dee, I guess that's fine for now. And you say that they're settling, Mike. Is this storyline settled?
So this is where I'm going to make my own leap of faith, unlike these characters, and make a big prediction here. I think we are settling story-wise and relationship-wise for the time being. Josh, there is only one way, though, that these two characters will inevitably be drawn into the arms of each other. Because now we have sort of said, it's just from an emotional perspective, they're not going to necessarily let go of kind of like the life rafts that they're on right now and try to swim, hoping that they reach the shore and live happily ever after. I think this only has to lead to one conclusion, which is one of, if not both, of Sam Anders and Duala dying by the end of the season.
The big D is not divorce, it's death.
I think that's what's going to happen, because I think it is going to then shake up the status quo, right? That's the thing. We've defaulted back to the status quo, as we have for most of season 3 of these two pairs. I can't see a world where they're like, all right, let's explore this again for the umpteenth time. I think the only way that they possibly can have to face their feelings for each other is if one of them dies. Because
is there anyone on the show right now who is praying harder for a human to be a Cylon than Lee and Starbuck? Like, man, if my spouse was just a Cylon, then I'd really be allowed out of the marriage contract.
I mean, that's what Tyrell should have recommended, actually, right? Like, you better pray she's a Cylon, because then you'll have it's the greatest hall pass in the world.
If she's a Cylon, you don't have to worry about shit. So interesting, noting the prediction for sure. Mike, let's do the top 5s and the bottom 5s. You've got 3 MVPs to give out. I've got 3 LVPs to give out. How do you want to do this?
All right. Well, let me get the one I mentioned out of the way earlier. I'm giving one to Caprica 6, which I'm more and more relying on these deleted scenes, Josh, to guide my vision, because let's be honest, to your point at the beginning of this podcast, I'm getting less out of the main plot of these episodes than I thought. And so if I am following the line of logic that Caprica 6 was at least somewhat of the reason why Laura Roslin does proceed with not executing Gaius Baltar outright and pursuing a trial, I'm going to give her credit.
You're going to give her a deleted scene point.
I'm going to a DSP.
Yeah. She is seen. Her deleted scene has been seen. Okay, so one for Caprica 6. I'm going to give one, and I also should say that I'm going to take a point away, so this is going to nooch, as we like to say. Gaius Baltar, I'll give an MVP and an LVP point. The MVP is really for James Callis, who I think is like consistently one of the very best performers on this show, and you get a real showcase for it in this episode. On the flip, he almost gets stabbed in the throat with a pen, which leads to my other MVP point, Felix Gaeta. Because how did he get in twice without anyone realizing, oh, wait, you know what he might want to do? So, like, props to Gaeta and real marks against Adama and the fleet for allowing Gaeta to get that close to Baltar twice.
Yeah, honestly, there are people that are going to deserve the docking more that we'll get into. But like, if I had a third LVP point, it might go to like Ty or like whoever was in charge of a lot of these security features, considering the camera, which gets spotted, considering letting Gaeta in a second time, not giving a second thought to like what Roslin does afterwards, which is like, oh yeah, we should have expected the entire time that you would want to murder him. Like they let a lot of things lapse here that lets Gaius Baltar be lucky that he survives with his life this episode.
For sure. Okay, so those are my MVPs. You want to finish yours out?
Yeah, so listen, as much as I'm going against what I just said, I will give my 2 points to Laura Roslin and to Adama, just because to watch them go so aggro in this episode, and they were able to get a good amount of information out of him, like for what it's worth. And certainly the ethics of torture is something that's been talked about a bunch on BSG, and I'm assuming will for the next ascertainable future when it comes to this series. doesn't get a good amount of information out of Gaius Baltar about the Final Five, about the Temple, about all of this stuff. And so the past they relentlessly pursued, even if they did not get like the exact answers that they wanted. And I'll also give a point to Roslyn as well for also coming to the conclusion of like, all right, we need to keep him around for a little bit, so we will give him a trial. But I'm also going to give credit to Adama for, again, debating on the moralities of it is one thing, but from like a tactical perspective, was a
It
good
worked.
technique to bring that
Great.
LSD in.
Good points for being good at being bad, as we like to say.
I mean, that should have been like the Cylon detector. Screw all the whole Mishigas from season 1. Just lace a bunch of things with LSD and then take everyone in one by one and be like, "Are you a Cylon?"
Yeah. That would have been a very. I think that would have been a very costly way of doing this.
I mean, yeah, I don't know how much
You've
LSD
got
was.
all of humanity just tripping balls at the same time.
Escapism is a thing, Josh.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we're all tripping balls at the same time anyway. On the bottom 5, Mike and I are doing the same thing. I already nooched out Baltar. I'm piling on Lee and Starbuck. So is Mike. So 2 to Lee, 2 to Starbuck. What more is there to say?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I could, like, maybe I would do like it's 2 and 2. I would say more so like 2.5 to Lee versus 1.5 to Kara. Like,
Yeah.
this is actually Lee looks a lot worse in this.
You know what?
Than Kara
I'm
does.
gonna give Lee a second point. I'm gonna fix this.
Good, yeah.
I'm doing 2 against Lee and only 1 against Starbuck. So
because we also focus much more on Lee in this episode with his decision to go back.
And he's a real piece of work.
He's a real piece of, like, at least Kara, yes, her wishy-washiness is frustrating, but we're sort of used to it at this point. Like, Lee Adama, and maybe it's because he is, much like Jack Shephard, like, really has his heart open and, like, is clearly reacting to a lot of complicated emotions, but, like, does a lot of bad shit and says a lot of bad shit in this episode, including to his own wife, who he reconciles with at the end.
My wife. Okay, so Starbuck is still the reigning LVP of season 3 thus far with -7 points. But your boy, Lee Adama, is the next named character.
Wow!
He is tied at -5 alongside the Cylons.
And it is Chief Lee, not Chief Cheerilee, due to this storyline with both of these characters. I mean, Starbuck does have her like stuff with Kat that still wasn't great.
This storyline is bombing. It's not doing any favors for these two characters. It's annoying. It's frustrating. It's tough to watch. They're bearing the brunt of it. So what are you going to do? Cylons versus the Fleet. I think we get to one of the fabled legendary NAs. I think if we are doing non-applicables, then I think that this certainly is going to fall in that category because there's not really a Cylon story. I mean, the only thing I could think of was like, did Baltar give enough intel to like do good for the Fleet? But I don't know. I think I'm still going to NA it.
Knowing Battlestar Galactica, we're going to take like 3 weeks before we address it anyways. They're going to sit on this information for a little bit. I also go with the logic that, you know, we don't see a fully fleshed, at least from what we know, confirmed Cylon in this episode. The only one we see is Head 6. And also, so just due to like absence as well, this feels like an NA for me again.
Yeah. Rating the episode, taking a break from all your worries, which of course you can all send in your scores when you email down the hatch, rhap@gmail.com, from a scale of 0 to 4.2. This is still an episode of Battlestar Galactica, Mike, which means it's better than most episodes of shows. It is a maybe weaker episode of BSG, or at least of the season so far. So it's sort of like in the mid category for me. I gave it a 3.5, which is just a hair better than a couple of my previous ratings for this season. The Passage, I gave a 3.3. Hero, I gave 3.3. A Measure of Salvation, I gave a 3.1. I think a 3.5 is really it's where it's dragged down. It is dragged because of the quadrangle. Where it stays is like on the raw horsepower of James Callis. So it ends up being like a more positive result ultimately, because I think his stuff is so good, and I tend to be charitable towards the show because I love it. But the stuff that sucks really is a bummer. I'm pretty bummed out with having to live in like the adultery quadrangle here.
Yeah, we're in our adultery era of BSG. Yeah, so I was really weighing back and forth, Josh, as to whether I like this episode more or on the same level than Rapture. I don't know if this is a hot take. I liked it more.
Okay.
I think it's, to me, like, yes, I understand, and especially I imagine from a macro perspective, like everything within the temple and everything with the final five. I spoke about this last week, how it wasn't exactly something I loved. And so I agree that the Baltar stuff lifts this episode, both in getting to explore this character, to really like address the elephant in the room of like, why is he doing what he's doing? And also some of the interesting imagery as well, once he's actually being tortured. And I think we talked through some really interesting stuff about like checking with Gata about this. Surprisingly, not that much stuff on like Rosalind and Adama, but I think they're more surprisingly straightforward in this episode than usual. But still, very welcome appearance from James Callis as he finally gets to do, in my opinion, something meaningful in season 3. But it only lifts it so far because, like you said, the quadrangle stuff continues to drag the middle part of the season down. And then also, again, on top of that, it's fun to sort of like mire ourselves in this character stuff for now. But I also leave this episode still being a bit like, what major stuff did we learn? How much are we moving the plot forward, the ball forward? And that doesn't need to be every single episode. But I feel like some of the cool stuff they were doing with the character does not necessarily outweigh kind of the effect that I left with, which is like, all right, it's cool that they know this, but what are we going to do about this? So I'm still going to settle on a 3-4 for the time being.
I think that's fair. I think it's interesting, or maybe even funny, that this episode's called "Taking a Break from All Your Worries," when in reality, like, we're just like, come on, you're giving me more worries. Although
that's
I guess
exactly
that's ultimately what they decide, right? Like, Lee's like, I'm done with the side piece. Starbuck was my rainy day woman. Now you're my sunshine gal. I'm with you, D. It's you and me. And like, no worries. Be happy. And that's where we leave it. But like the episode itself, I don't feel like I took a break from my worries. I felt like I sailed with my woes.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting title. I would imagine it's one of the longer titles in BSG history. And I guess, I mean, is it a reference to like the bar? Is it the ironic title of like, oh, Baltar's being tortured, but he's supposed to be taking a break from all his worries?
Yeah. Taking a break from all your worries, I believe. Is that the name of the Cheers theme song?
Really?
That's what the Google machine was trying to tell me, but I don't think so. It's a partial quote from Where Everybody Knows Your Name. Taking a break from all your worries. So it's a Cheers reference.
When the bar is featured in 3 episodes,
three scenes. Yeah. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. Well, we don't need to litigate it any further than that. There's going to be enough litigation in our future with a trial looming. No jumps. 8 fracks, 3 from Lee, 2 from Chief, 1 apiece from Baltar, D, and Gata. 103 fracks. This is the new season frack leader. So already in 13 episodes of season 3, I believe we have more fracks than we've gotten in any single season of the show.
Wow.
So how about that?
I mean, the situation that a lot of these characters were in was very frack-worthy for a lot of it, so that makes sense.
I do think that's fair. Okie doke. The next episode of Battlestar Galactica, Mike, season 3, episode 14, The Woman King.
Ooh.
Give me some predictions.
The Woman King.
Yeah.
I would love for this to be about 6. Like, I think it's a very fun idea that this is the leader of the Cylons is a woman, despite the fact that there's a council of Cylons. I think it's a very cool idea. It would actually be a really fun episode. And I don't want to write an episode that doesn't exist, but if we like, again, maybe it's because I was teased by the Caprica 6 Roslyn scene, but like I would love someone to show that dichotomy of like leaders. Otherwise, it's gonna be, hey, we're gonna explore the scrolls of Pythia. We're gonna take a look at what the scriptures are saying. Oh, there's going to be a woman king. Could it be Roslyn? Could it be Starbuck? Could it be Athena? We shall see. I am expecting a reappearance from Athena and probably Hilo as well. They were very much absent understandably taking care of their baby, but I think they're going to come back to prominence next episode.
Okay, well, we'll see. The Woman King is what's coming next on Down the Hatch. Shouts, as always, to the team behind the curtain and Operation Mattingly, making this podcast possible, including some very important additions that happened to the podcast as we were podcasting. So huge props to Ben and Brendan. Yeah, don't worry about it. Huge props to Ben and Brendan for making this podcast possible and going above and beyond, helping me to help confuse Mike Bloom. Of course,
Josh, I guarantee you no help is needed in that category.
Yeah, definitely not. So they help hook up Mike Bloom to the pneumatic tubes that scramble his brain.
Please don't hook me up to a pneumatic tube. That would imply that all my organs are getting sucked out of me.
And make it fun to listen to on the podcast. Of course, you can subscribe Down the Hatch wherever you get your podcast. Send in feedback. Down the Hatch, RHAP @gmail.com. You can also hit us up on the internet. I'm on Blue Sky @Round Howard. Mike Bloom, what's going on with you?
A lot of Survivor stuff. Basically, everything's out there. I've got like a gaggle of podcasts left to do with Rob, but otherwise, get yourself prepared for what is to come. Hopefully, people will do better in the swimming challenges than Gaius Baltar did in his own Mind Palace. But otherwise, Reality Flash. We had a fun podcast last week recapping the Amazing Race cast that was just revealed. There might be another cast that's being speculated about that I might be doing an edition on this week. We can check out everything I'm doing at a Mike Bloom type on all social media.
All right, folks, when we return, we shall do so hailing the Woman King. That's next on Battlestar Galactica, Down the Hatch. Until then, take care and frack off. Bye.